Capital Queers, Alex Reynolds Mystery. Book 3. Author, Fred Hunter. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1999. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 9. In the car on the way home, I told Mother and Peter what Linda had said. "Two respectable men in gray suits. I don't like the sound of this," said Mother. "You'd rather they looked demented," I said. "I'd rather they didn't look like the two agents that visited us right after Ryan was killed," Mother said, wrinkling her nose at me in the rearview mirror. "Could they really be the same guys?" "I hope not," said Peter, sweeping his dark locks back out of his eyes with his right hand. "I don't have a lot of faith in the government, but I wouldn't want to believe they just go around killing people to get what they want." "It depends on what they're looking for," I countered. It was one of those rare occasions when I found out our roles reversing. Mother shrugged. "After killing two people in cold blood, I hardly think that they would stick to killing us. I mean, if Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Dunn were the men that Linda saw leaving the yard, would they then sit calmly in our living room and ask us about it?" "If they were clever enough," I said. "Honey, they work for the government," Peter said with an ironic smile. Mother sighed impatiently. "My point is, I would think they would have just killed us." We fell silent for a few moments. We'd finally reached our own neck of the woods, and Mother made the turn onto Fullerton that would bring us back to our humble townhouse. "An object?" she said out of the blue. "What?" I said. She took a deep breath. "Well, doesn't that strike you as an odd way of putting it? They kept referring to what they thought Mason had obtained as an object. Why wouldn't they tell us what it was?" "Probably just more that need-to-know basis crap that Nelson is always handing us," said Peter. "Possibly," Mother replied, "but I think we need to look at this logically. It could have been anything silly like microfilm because it had to be something that Mason could recognize on the spot." "Not necessarily," I said. "He had that doll for several days. He had time to examine whatever it was he found." "But you have to remember what he did when he found it, darling." "What?" I said, getting irritated with myself that I didn't understand. "He took it to Marshal Torkelson," Peter said to me. Then he turned to Mother and added, "But Marshall said Mason just showed him the doll, not anything else. Why not just have whatever it was appraised?" "Exactly," said Mother, beaming at him as if she was confident it would come to him if he gave it time. And it did. His face brightened suddenly, and he said, "Oh, I see." "What?" I said. "He asked Marshall about where the doll came from," Peter explained, "because he was trying to find out the value without letting anybody know exactly what he had." "Oh, great," I said, rolling my eyes. "Mason and Ryan wouldn't say what it was. Dunn and Hamilton wouldn't tell us what it was. The Thai import people don't know what it was, and the police don't know anything about anything. So how do we find out what the hell this thing is that's so important?" "Intrinsic value," Mother mused, considering the words that Hamilton had used. "Something of intrinsic value, but it had to be something valuable enough that Mason could tell it was worth something. It's a riddle, rather like those logic problems that used to give at school. You know what I mean? Two trains leaving different stations at the same time, and when will they meet?" "Yeah," said Peter. "Only in those problems, the trains weren't going to kill somebody if you didn't figure it out." Mother steered the car into the alley and clucked her tongue as she is wont to do whenever we approach the rather ramshackle structure that serves as our garage. She must have some measure of affection for it as it stands, though, because she certainly has enough money to fix it if she wants to. Just as we pulled up behind the garage, I glanced at our townhouse and saw the faint flash of light. "Wait a minute," I said. "Quiet!" "Quiet? What are you talking about?" Mother said. "We're not making any noise." "Shh! Did you see it?" "What?" said Peter. "There's somebody in the house." Both of them turned in unison and looked out the windshield, which was useless because the garage was now blocking the view. "How do you know?" Peter asked. "I saw a light, just for a second." Are you sure? Said Mother, looking over her shoulder at me. Yes, it swung up for just a second and back down again. It must be a flashlight. Lord, said Mother, wide-eyed. The atmosphere in the car had suddenly become extremely tense, as if the knowledge of someone going through our house made us all feel that we weren't safe anywhere, even in the car. Without another word, Mother popped open her car door. What are you doing? I demanded in a loud whisper. She paused and looked back at me. Well, we can't stay here. I grabbed her shoulders. Are you out of your mind? You can't go in there. She looked at me as if I was clearly mad. I can go next door to Maddie's and call the police. And tell them what? That our home is being invaded by someone looking for something that we're not supposed to have? Darling, you make me dizzy when you talk like that. I'm serious. Well, what exactly do you think we should do? Just sit here in the bleeding car and let them get away? I thought for a minute, then said, No, I want to get a look at whoever it is that's in there. You really are mad, said Mother. Her eyes were still wide, but all the humor had gone out of her expression. No, I'm not. Even if you call the police, whoever's in there will probably be gone by the time they get here, and I want to see who it is. I can bloody well guess who it is. Who? Peter looked over the back of the front seat at me. Dunn and Hamilton? The guys from the State Department? Why the hell would they be searching our house? Why, it should be obvious, said Mother, curling the right side of her lips. I mean, why does it have to be them? It could be anybody. They're the only ones who know we're involved in this. We're not involved in anything, I protested. The fact that someone is going through our home right now would indicate that you're wrong. I conceded the point by rolling my eyes disgustedly. Alex, the only time our house has ever been burgled is when we've gotten us involved in these little episodes. That's not fair. I did not get us involved in this. My tone was more indignant than I had ever used with Mother before. I'll admit that I was responsible for a couple of unfortunate things, but this is not my fault. If anything, it's Mason's fault for buying that damn doll. Mother raised her eyebrows. I had clearly stepped over the line. Oh, I say, that's very Peter interrupted with a sigh. Do you think that the two of you could possibly work this out when we're in a little less danger? Both of us looked at him. Mother laughed lightly. Sorry, Alex. It looks like you're not the only one being affected by all the stress. No, it was my fault. I should have. Peter cleared his throat. Could you work that out later, too? There are people searching our house. The three of us looked back toward the house for a moment in silence. After giving it some thought, I said, All right, Mother, go call the police. But while you're doing that, I'm going to go up and try to get a look at who's in there. Like hell, Mother exclaimed. I'm with Jean, said Peter, forever attempting to be the voice of reason when I sound like I'm about to do something really stupid. We should just call the police and hope they got here in time to catch whoever's in the house. If it's the guys from the State Department, then they can explain the whole thing to the police and we can just claim ignorance. I sat back in my seat. You guys don't understand. It may not be Dunn and Hamilton. It might be the killers trying to find the thing they were trying to get from Mason and Ryan. That's more of a reason not to go there, Mother exclaimed. Then suddenly her expression cleared. But what am I thinking? It can't be them. They wouldn't know that we have anything to do with this, would they? Peter said, You're not saying he should do this crazy thing? Oh, no, Mother replied so offhandedly that neither of us was sure that she hadn't been suggesting it. Look, I said as I opened the car door, you stay here and I'll just go up there and see if I can get a peek at who's in there. No, Alex, I really wasn't. I'll be fine, don't worry. Peter will be with me. I will, said Peter with one eyebrow raised. I looked at him for a moment. Well, you wouldn't want me going up there alone, would you? He frowned. Even a frown looks beautiful on that face. You know, I've often secretly hoped that someday if anything ever happened to one of us, we would die together, just because I didn't think I'd ever want to face life without you. Really? I said, barely able to keep my voice from quivering. Yeah, he said quietly, opening the door on his side of the car. And that was before I knew you were going to keep gleefully leading us into the valley of the shadow of death. We both climbed out of the car, and before softly closing the door, I looked in at Mother and said, "You stay here." "Of course," she replied with one of those enigmatic smiles that makes me fear for the fate of mankind. Peter and I slipped around the corner of the garage and made our way along the side. When we reached the front, I peeked around the corner as surreptitiously as I knew how, and Peter looked over my shoulder. There wasn't a repeat of the light. If there was still someone in there, and if it hadn't been my imagination, then whoever it was seemed to be making certain they didn't make any more mistakes. I glanced at Peter and he nodded. Then we ran quietly across the back lawn, keeping low, and came to a stop by the back of the house, crouching on either side of the screen door to the porch. I gave Peter a look that was supposed to ask, "What do we do now?" But in the darkness, he couldn't see me. The kitchen windows were a bit too high for us to look in with any ease, and I didn't think either of us wanted to take the risk of going around to the side windows for fear that the movement would be noticed. I still didn't see a repeat of the light. Our only real hope was the window in the back door, which opened onto the porch, but that meant going up 4 stairs and through the screen door. When we had remained crouched there for what seemed like an eternity, at least to my calves, I signaled Peter that I was going to move. I started up the stairs, still staying as low as possible. I closed my eyes and squinched my face up as I turned the handle on the screen door, as if that would make the door open more quietly. I managed to pull it open with only a faint squeak and moved onto the porch. I was still holding the door open as Peter reached out for it to follow me in. I let go of the door thinking that he had it, but I was wrong. In one of those sickening moments of realization you get when you know that you've just made a really big mistake, I felt the door swing shut. It closed with a loud bang before I could turn to catch it. Through the screen, Peter's face looked as startled as I felt. I whispered, "Ah, shit," and plastered myself against the door under the window. Likewise, Peter pressed himself against the wall outside the screen door and looked like he'd like to disappear into it. I had my ear to the door and couldn't hear anything at first, but then there seemed to be a great rush within the house away from the back door. I guessed that whoever was in there was making a hasty departure through the front door. I eased myself up and took a deep breath before peeking through the window. Ever since seeing that Twilight Zone episode with William Shatner on the airplane, I've harbored this secret fear that if I peek through a window, there'll be a gremlin staring back at me from the other side. It's irrational, but I saw that show when I was little, and those things stick with you. Anyway, with the deep breath in my lungs, I forced myself up to look through the window and saw nothing. No gremlin, and nobody else either. But I thought I heard the front door open. "I think they're gone," I said to Peter, who pulled away from the wall and came up onto the porch. I fitted my key in the lock and turned it, but found that the lock had already been opened. I don't know why that made my heart sink, since we already knew that somebody had been in there. We rushed into the kitchen and through the house to the front door, with which our burglars had left ajar in their rush to get out. We ran down the front steps into the walk and then looked both ways down the street. "They went that way," Mother's voice came from the shrubbery beside the narrow walk between our house and our neighbors. "What?" She came out to join us. "They went that way," she repeated, pointing east. "What the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay in the car." She placed her hands on her hips and frowned. "Are you going to stand there nattering at me, or are you going to follow them?" Peter and I ran off in the direction that Mother had indicated, figuring that in order to have disappeared so quickly, they must have turned off at the first side street. But when we got to the end of the block and looked, nobody was there. Not that we expected there to be. Our exchange with Mother hadn't been long, but it had been enough for whoever had been in our house to disappear. As we walked back to the house, I felt a chill run up my spine. Our house had been invaded before, but we'd never been there when it happened. It was really unsettling to not only know that your house had been broken into, but to almost stumble into the people who did it. When we entered the living room, I was surprised to find that the house was none the worse for wear. Whoever was searching it was being careful about it, which, oddly enough, made me feel a bit relieved, knowing how destructive the killers had been at Mason and Ryan's apartment. I guess this gave me hope that they weren't the ones who'd broken in here. We found Mother dialing the phone. "Are you calling the police?" Peter asked. "No, I'm calling that bloody Larry Nelson." Nelson? Why? I said. Oh, by the way, she said as if she hadn't heard the question, I checked. The bag of doll leavings is still there. They didn't find them, but I couldn't find Duffy. Why are you calling Nelson? Because I'm damned if I'll have those damned government people breaking into our house, she exclaimed, holding the half-dialed phone out at me as if it was somehow involved in the break-in. And I intend to tell Larry Nelson just that. But he doesn't have anything to do with the State Department. Not half, she said, not particularly making sense, but dropping her H's as she is wont to do when she's truly upset. But they're all connected somehow. He bloody well better be able to do something about this. Mother, we don't know that it was Hamilton and Dunn. Who else could it be? Nobody else knows that we had anything to do with Mason and Ryan. But you didn't see them, did you, Jean? Peter asked. No, I didn't get there in time. I held back until I heard the door slam, then lit quick as I could go to the front walk. I thought perhaps they'd go that way. Mother, you might have run into them. Well, what of it? I belong here. They don't. But they might have. Did you see anything? Peter chimed in, cutting me off. I was only halfway there when they ran past. I just saw a flash of them. I didn't get to see who it was, but I know there was more than one of them. She looked back down at the phone and realized that she'd forgotten how far she'd gone in dialing Nelson's number. When we interrupted her, she pressed the disconnect button, then started dialing again. Mother, it's after 11 in Washington. Nelson's not going to be there. It's a cellular phone, she said, none too softly. He doesn't have to be there. He just has to be in his pants. Let's hope he is. I'm sure he is, said Peter. I can't imagine that he has any social life. I'll see if I can find the dog. Peter had never been overly fond of Agent Lawrence Nelson. I didn't know whether that was out of a professional dislike or whether it was from the general distrust he felt toward anyone in the government. Hell, we'd known Frank O'Neill for years, and Peter still didn't quite trust him, mainly because he was on the police force. Larry, said Mother sharply. Apparently, Nelson was still with his pants. Listen, what's up with you, huh? What do you mean having government agents break into our house and search it? She listened for a moment, and the look on her face was definitely not amused. Then she said, Now you listen to me, Larry Nelson. You told us that those two men, that Hamilton and Dunn, really do work for the State Department. If that's true, then it's your people who just broke in here. All right? They're not your people, but they're government people. They're the only ones who know about. Yes, I know that, but it had to be them. Who else could it be? She listened again, then curled her lips and said witheringly, Ha ha. She put her hand over the mouthpiece and looked at me. He said that knowing us, it could be anybody. Ha ha, I replied, imitating her. I want something done about it, she said into the phone. Straight away. Do you understand? She now went silent for an extended pause. Her expression relaxed somewhat, but instead of looking relieved, she looked worried. She then straightened herself up and said, Of course we don't know. What is he asking you? I said. She put her hand over the mouthpiece again and whispered, He wants to know if we know what they were looking for. When I raised my eyebrows, she added, I'm not lying. We really don't. She shook her hand away and said into the phone, Well, I would very much appreciate it if you would. Then she hung up. You'd appreciate it if he'd what? I asked. He said he'll try to find out just what it's all about and let us know, she said. Then she heaved a heavy sigh. Maybe he can find out something from his end. Lord knows we've been stymied on ours. Except we know that we've done something, or they wouldn't have come here. Mother rolled her eyes. Darling, we haven't done anything. We don't have anything, and we don't know anything. That doesn't mean they don't think we do. You know that as well as I do. At that moment, Peter came down the stairs, holding the previously missing dog in his arms. Where was he? Mother said with a broad smile. She took both of his cheeks, the dog's, not Peter's, in her hands and gave him a loving shake. He was hiding under the bed. It figures, I said. Oh, the poor doggy, said Mother. Great watchdog. He's not supposed to be a watchdog, Mother said, pressing her forehead against the dog's. We're supposed to look out for him. She gave his head a scratch, straightened up, and said, All right, that's enough of that. I know you've been scared, so let's take you out and give you a biscuit, oh? With that, Mother headed for the kitchen with the dog scrambling at her feet. I looked at Peter and said, There was a time when our lives were in danger that she'd look after me. Peter grinned. Do you want a biscuit, honey? I slapped his shoulder. I'm going to go put the car away. I went out through the back door, across the yard, and down the walk alongside the garage to the alley. In Mother's haste to catch a glimpse of the criminal, she'd left the driver's side door open and the motor running. I spared a thought for how lucky we were that the car hadn't been stolen on top of everything else that had happened. I was just climbing into the driver's seat when a soft voice spoke out of nowhere. Mr. Reynolds? I jumped from the car as if it were haunted and peered in the window to the back seat. There was nobody there. Mr. Reynolds, the voice came again from the general vicinity of the garage. A slender Asian man stepped from the shadows by the garage door. Jesus Christ, where'd you come from? I'm sorry if I startled you, he said quietly, stopping just short of coming into the light thrown by the overhead lamp on the other side of the alley. I wanted to talk to you. Who are you? That doesn't matter. I peered through the relative darkness at him. You look familiar. You were at the Thai import company, weren't you? He nodded. Yes, I was there when you paid your visit. Why are you here? I came because it is important that I talk to you. I turned my head doubtfully, keeping my eyes on him. Most of our visitors come to the front door. There was a hint of a smile on his face. It was apparent when I arrived that your house was occupied by someone other than its proper tenants. I thought it best to wait somewhere out of the way. Did you see who was in the house? No, he replied with a slight shake of his head. I'm afraid not. I was back here and their retreat was rather hasty, wasn't it? He seemed to find that amusing. What did you want to talk to me about? He looked down at the ground, then up at me. I want to talk to you about what you found. What are you talking about? I didn't find anything. I thought I detected more than a hint of a smile this time. Though I wouldn't want you to think I meant any disrespect to my superior by what I'm about to say, I'm afraid that Mr. Suckin lied to you when you visited him this morning. Lied about what? There was a pause, and he said, About the doll, Mr. Reynolds. About the doll that you came to ask him about. How do you know he lied? Because when a certain item was stolen in my country, all of the importers of Thai goods, particularly dolls, were notified to be on the lookout for it. That is how I know that Mr. Suckin knew what you were referring to. Actually, when I asked the question, I had wanted to know how the guy knew that Suckin had said to me at all, but I thought it would be better to let that pass. I'm afraid I still don't know what you're talking about, he sighed. You must know something, or you wouldn't have known to come to us. All I knew for sure was that the doll came from Thailand. I don't have any idea why the doll was so important. From what I could see of his face, I was certain that he didn't believe me. Perhaps you could fill me in, I added, just because I thought it might convince him that I really didn't know, and also might get him to give me some information. He looked back down at the ground for such a long moment of silence that, for all I knew, he could have been given a silent prayer for guidance. Then he looked up and said, A certain item is believed to have come into the possession of your friend. Your friend who was killed? He said this last bit slowly to give it more emphasis. I thought that much, I said impatiently. But what is it? He hesitated, then said, It is an item of sufficient significance to make it almost invaluable. Again, he wanted to dance. I wondered if any of these people would ever realize that if they would just come out and tell you what the hell they were talking about, you might be able to help them. So it's worth a lot of money, I said, trying to draw him out. I didn't want to make him angry because I figured I could get more information out of him if I could keep him talking. It is of a certain financial value, he replied somewhat stiffly, making it a worthwhile object. I suppose, to vend on the open market, if one is able. There was something in his tone that made it clear he didn't think anybody would live long enough to sell the thing. But it has a value beyond mere monetary consideration that makes it, I should say, priceless. Now, what could that be? I said with enough sarcasm to let him know that I was tired of going around in circles. He bowed his head briefly, then said, "It is an artifact of religious significance." He stopped apparently to let this sink in, which it did. It brought back Billings' questions about whether Mason and Ryan were involved in some sort of religious cult or something. Being eviscerated, the police seemed to think that meant it was some sort of religious doings. And it looked like they were right. But what is it? How am I supposed to know whether or not I've seen it if I don't know what the hell it is? The smile reappeared. You would know if you saw it, as I'm sure you know. I don't know anything, I said testily, and I haven't seen any religious icon. It was believed that the item was in the possession of your friend, he said slowly. It is now believed it has come into your possession. My possession? Why? Because you're known to have been asking questions about it. I asked questions about a dial, I protested, not about some artifact. There was a gentle, condescending laugh. You asked questions about a particular doll. But still, I beg of you, Mr. Reynolds, he said, not sounding a bit like he was begging. If you have found the artifact, please turn it over to the authorities. The authorities? If somebody's willing to kill over it, wouldn't it be safer for me to turn it over to the people who are after it? Immediately after I said this, I realized how it sounded like. I quickly added, I mean, if I had it. It doesn't matter if you give it to the authorities, it will be returned to its rightful place. The temple from which it was stolen, if it must be recovered by its adherents, then things may not go so well for you. Now he really was starting to scare me, but why? Why would they want to hurt someone who wanted to give it back to them? I knew Mason really well. If he knew that whatever the hell this thing is was that important to somebody, then he would have given it back to them. Why would they kill him anyway? The man seemed to bristle in the relative darkness. I got the feeling I was digging my grave deeper and deeper. What I'd meant to as simple questions is he seemed to keep taking his proof that I had the blasted thing. His kept his voice even as he replied. Because it has been defiled. It was holy, and it has been defiled. Please trust me when I say to you, Mr. Reynolds, that whoever has the item now is in the gravest of danger. Your life is worth nothing if you do not turn it over to the proper authorities immediately. It didn't escape me that he'd gone from the abstract to the specific when he said, your life is worth nothing. He really did think I had the thing. And I assure you these people are ruthless and will stop at nothing to retrieve what has been stolen from them. Who are these people? I asked with frustration. There was a pause, then he said in a whisper as if he were afraid to be heard. The Montanayans. What? At that moment, Peter called out from the back porch. Alex, what's taking you so long? I stepped to the side of the garage and called back. I'm back here. When I turned back, the Asian man had disappeared. I was standing there gaping like an idiot at the space by the shadows where the man had been standing. Then suddenly a voice said, What are you doing? Jesus! I cried out as I wheeled around, putting my hand on my heart. Peter was looking back at me with a big question mark on his face. Don't do that! Do what? What are you doing out here? I let my hand drop and sighed with relief. It wasn't until then that I realized I'd been trembling. Apparently I'm doing Mr. Moto on location. What are you talking about? I told Peter all about the strange visitor, and he looked less than pleased. I don't like this, he said. People breaking into the house, and then this guy popping up back here. This is not good. That's an understatement, I said, dropping into the driver's seat of the car. I drove into the garage, and Peter pulled the door down, closing himself inside with me. I climbed out of the car in the darkness and joined Peter behind it, sitting myself on the trunk. God, what a mess. It looks like whoever killed Mason and Ryan thinks that we've got whatever it is they're looking for. So didn't this guy tell you what the hell it is that everybody's after? I shook my head. No, just that it's some sort of religious icon, so it could be anything from a statue of Mary to a side of beef. Who the hell knows? Christ, they keep calling it an item or an object, and we're supposed to divine from that what the damn thing is. It's like being in some psychotic game of password. Except, I cut him off. If you're going to say that in a real game of passwords you don't get killed if you don't guess the right word, I don't need to hear it right now. Sorry, he said sheepishly. There was a pause, then he said, Are you cold? No, I said, realizing now that he pointed it out that I was still trembling. Peter smiled and said, Here, and put his arms around me and rubbed my back. I slipped my arms around his neck and pulled him closer, my lips meeting his. We were silent for a few moments, content to enjoy the warmth of each other's closeness. Did you mean what you said? I asked. About what? About dying together, he smiled. Well, I don't want to do it anytime soon, but yes, I did, morbid as it may sound. I shook my head, still looking away from him. It doesn't sound morbid to me. He took my face in his hands, gently turning me to face him. Have I told you lately how much I love you and that you're the most important thing in my life? Uh-huh. He laughed lightly. Well, it's still true. We kissed again and went on kissing until there was a knock at the side of the door of the garage. Boys, are you in there? We loosened our lip lock and laughed, pressing our foreheads together. You know, I said, when she does that, I feel like I'm 14 again. Peter screwed up his face comically. Were you bringing boys home when you were 14? I mussed his hair and called out, Coming, Mother! You mustn't disappear like that when we're being burgled, Mother said as the three of us walked back to the house. First you're coming out here and being gone for so long, then I send Peter out to find you and he doesn't come back. It's like to give one pause, you know? Sorry, I said. And then I told her about the surreptitious meeting with the Asian gentleman. Oh dear, she said as we entered the kitchen, and that it doesn't have to have been the boys from the State Department who broke in here. Not necessarily, said Peter, but it still might have been them. Lord, I hope so. Not 20 minutes earlier, she'd been furious at the thought that it had been Hamilton and Dunn. Now she changed her tune, and I could easily understand why. I suppose I shall have to apologize to Larry, Mother said, broadening her accent. Don't you dare! Peter and I exclaimed in unison. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.